What's up, guys? Gonna take apart my small Sebenza and lube it up, clean it out, lube it up. It's getting kind of stiff. There's probably some lint in there. Just needs a clean. So I figured I would record the process and kind of talk throughout it. I did the Sebenza smoothness trick, and it kind of shows disassembly and reassembly, but I figured I would make a dedicated video just in case somebody didn't want to see that whole thing. The process is exactly the same for all Sebenzas, large, small, Insingo, wood inlay. I mean, they're all the same internally. So this is going to be the same as any other Sebenza. You don't have to take the knife completely apart to do it, and I'll show you how to do that. First step is to pop loose the screw next to the pivot. So that screw right there. You want to pop it loose. You hear that snap? That is not a problem. That's actually by design. Reeve has designed these screws so that when you snug them down, the harder steel screw actually galls against the titanium, just the way a sticky lock galls against a steel blade and it sticks. These screws do that exact same thing against the titanium, and that's what keeps them tight. This is why you don't have to use Loctite on Sebenzas, because these screws, once you tighten them down, gall, aka stick, against the titanium, and that keeps them from loosening up under their own power. So pop this screw loose. It just needs to be loose. You don't have to take it out. Pop the pivot loose, and then while you're unscrewing, push to the other side, and that will actually push the pivot out of the back end of the knife. You can see it coming out. Then you can take your screw all the way out, so you're left with this. You're left with no pivot screw and the pivot sticking out. Now, funny thing about Sebenzas is if you had this screw tightened and you had the pivot screw completely out, there still is going to be no blade play. That's how tight Sebenzas are fit. You could take the pivot screw completely out. You can't take the pivot out, but you can take the pivot screw out and still have no blade play. And that's a testament to how well these knives are fit. So, put your pivot aside. You want to grab your blade with your hand, or grab your knife with your hand, and you want to pull the blade with the thumb stud up and out at an angle. So you want to come up and out while you're rotating the blade out. And before you pull it all the way out, take the pressure of the lock bar with your thumb. That way you could pull the blade all the way out and the lock bar doesn't snap closed. Now sometimes the washer will get stuck in there because of the grease. It happens. Just take something and actually just push the washer enough so that you can grab it. I know that didn't focus in, but you see how the washer is poking out? You can just grab it with your fingers and pull it out. Alright, you're done with this part. You can clean it out if you want to. You can go ahead and completely disassemble it if you wanted to, but I found that it doesn't, there's no point. There's really no need to do this unless it's extremely dirty. Now is a good time to get a shot of the treatment that Reeve puts on their lock face. Actually, you can't see it with the flashlight, so I'll just go ahead and take this knife completely apart. A lot of people think that Reeve carbonizes his lock face, but it's actually a totally different process. Carbonization leaves a layer of foreign material, which is tungsten carbide, on the titanium. The process that Reeve uses actually just forms an oxide layer on the titanium, and it's much harder than the softer titanium underneath. So you can see where you have part of the heat treatment right here. You have that slant where the ceramic detent ball rides, and then on the lock face itself you have a little pad with the oxide layer. It's hard to focus in on that. May just have to manually focus it. There we go. So you can see the oxide layer. Right there. And that is what is taking the force of locking over and over and over. You can see that there's just a bit of wear right there where my pinky fingernail is. That probably won't pose an issue, but it could later down the road if that oxide layer decides to flake off. But the inside of a Sebenza just looks the same as the outside, really. You have your date code. That's the first quarter of 2012. So we'll just go ahead and reassemble this part of the knife. Since you don't have to take this apart to clean it, I just did that for demonstration purposes. Like I said, Sebenzas are extremely easy to take apart and reassemble though. I mean, there's really not many parts to lose or screw up, and their hardware is extremely high quality, so you don't have to worry about stripping the screws and all that kind of stuff. It's just a joy to take apart and put back together because it is so easy. Alright, moving on to the blade itself, you have this, which is essentially your large washer, which is on the non-locking side. You have your small washer, which is on the locking side, and you have your pivot bushing. So I'm going to go ahead and take the small washer off. So you want to make sure that you keep the washers oriented in a way that you can repeat it. So you want to always know which side of the washer faces the blade. So I always flip the washer over, and the up side is always blade side. Same thing for the locking side washer, facing up is blade side. Same thing for the pivot bushing, which is this thing right here. This isn't supposed to be dependent on which way it's facing, but I found that it is in some cases. So what I do is just lower the knife and then tap that out so that you know which way it's oriented. Now that we have those laying in a way that we know how to put it back together, just wipe all the gunk that you see on this blade off. Just wipe all that crap off. Get on the inside of the pivot and everything. The actual lock face. So now we have a clean lock face, a clean blade tang, and clean pivot hole. So now we can lay the blade aside. Now we want to clean our washers, making sure we keep them oriented so we know which side faces the blade. Nothing special here, just make sure that you get the majority of the gunk off. And if you do misplace which side goes on the blade, you can look at the washer in detail and see that this has no circular wear marks. Flip the washer over and you see all those circular wear marks, like right there. Right there you can see wear marks in a pattern. We know that that is the side that actually contacts the blade. Now the pivot bushing, you just kind of want to pinch so that you don't flip it and misplace which side goes in the blade which way. It's not supposed to be dependent, but like I said, I found that it is on some Sebenzas. You want it to go in the exact same way it came out. Now, an interesting thing about these pivot bushings is, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. If I can get it to focus in. I don't know if you'll be able to see on the inside of this pivot bushing, but it's actually got some machining marks that make it to where when you push the pivot into it, the pivot cannot spin or will not spin once it's seated in. The pivot and the pivot bushing rotate as one. So the blade moves around the pivot bushing instead of the pivot bushing and the blade moving around the pivot pin, if that makes sense. Alright, now that you have all the parts clean, you're going to want to lube the knife back up. If you look on the inside of the blade, you'll see that you have these divots. There's one right there. There's one right there. One right there. Those are actually just little indentations meant to hold the grease inside the pivot. So you're going to want to just apply some lube, and that was way too much. I just shook it all to the front so it came out pretty much way too much. Take your nozzle and spread all that around inside the pivot so that you have good coverage. And if you do end up having too much come out, just use that. So you see that we have an excess on the locking side. Just spread that excess around. That way we can use it instead of wiping it off and wasting that lube. Doesn't take much. I mean, a thin coating like that, that's way too thick actually. You can use much less than that and it will be satisfactory. Just rub the grease that you have around. Apply a little bit more if you need it. Again, too much came out there, but it's not going to hurt anything. You can use so much that it squeezes out of the ends of the knife or the front of the knife when you put it together, but it's not a big deal. That actually looks like more than it is in real life. The camera's like picking up that white like crazy. Apply just a tad bit to the locking face itself. Normally lube on a titanium frame lock on the locking surfaces is a no-no, but the way Chris Reeve heat treats the lock face, lube actually helps it. So put your pivot bushing back in the pivot hole the way it came out. Just slide it back in there. It should just slide in. If it doesn't, don't force it. These parts are fit so tightly that if it's not angled or if it's not completely plumb with a hole, it won't go in. So don't force it. If it binds up, pull it out and try it again. The weight of the grease, the viscosity of the grease will hold the pivot in there, and that's all you have to do after that. Apply your large washer, blade side in, to the non-locking side of the blade, and apply your small washer to the locking side, and then line everything up with your finger. So you want the pivot to get pushed through the bushing or the washer ever so slightly. Good way to do that is just pinch the whole assembly and then rotate the blade. Everything should seat itself pretty easily. Then just slide your fingers off. Everything should be sitting perfectly flush like that. You see nothing sticking out, no pivot bushing, no washer, nothing sticking out. I mean in the center. Of course this washer is going to be hanging off the blade a little bit, but everything is sitting perfectly flush. Now we're ready to slide this whole assembly back in the knife. So you have this screw loose, not necessarily necessary, but I have found that it helps a lot of the time. Go ahead and take pressure off the lock bar and slide this whole assembly in. Just like that. It should go in really easily. Then line your pivot hole up and push the bushing through. or the pivot pin. Sorry. It should pop through like that. If it doesn't, just wiggle the blade and line the hole up. Again, you shouldn't have to force it at all. Go ahead and snug this screw up. Don't crank it down all the way. Just snug it up. And then check function and flick the knife one time. That's actually recommended by Chris Reeve. Flick the knife one time just to seat everything. Then I always pop the screw loose and then crank it down for a final snug. Then I put the pivot pin in, pivot screw in, excuse me. And then snug it up as well. And again, hand tight. You don't have to torque them down like crazy. Just hand tight. And now everything is smooth as glass again. The Chris Reeve fluorinated grease is extremely smooth. It makes everything very smooth. A very fluid kind of action. So now it's just as smooth as it can be. No catches, no gritty feeling. Everything is exactly how it's supposed to be. And if it doesn't feel as smooth as it was before, you've pinched a washer or something. That's actually really common when people first start doing this. They maybe do something wrong or something isn't lined up. If it doesn't work smoother than it was before you cleaned it, then you've done something wrong. You need to take it apart and repeat the process. Everything should be smoother than it was before you took it apart, which it is. So anyway, hope this helps. If any of you guys have been wanting to know how to disassemble your Chris Reeve, pretty straightforward, really easy, and nothing to it. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I need to wrap this up. It went long. So see you next time.